handle the truth.
I'll be back.
He's alive!
Was an excellent day for an exorcism.
Hi, this is Joe, and this is the Filmjoe podcast, where film talk happens.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Filmjoe podcast, where we dive into the archives of lost films. And this actually concludes our bonus series of episodes between seasons. So this will be our last until we kick in season 3. So I'm Joe, and joined here by a very special guest, Jonathan of the podcast, The Carolina Storyteller. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Great to be here.
It's awesome to have you. So tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, it is The Carolina Storyteller. I am the host, Jonathan Phoenix, The Carolina Storyteller. And what we do is storytelling. It's fun and exciting. We cover stories, legends, myths, ghost stories from all over the world. I dive into a little bit of everything. Kind of touched on true crime, but only if it had some paranormal thing to the side of it. And of course, then I bring in fellow podcasters and other guests to have fun and talk about these interesting stories. And I try to do it in a little campfire style. And it's really fun. And people have been, really enjoyable.
Yeah, I really enjoy your podcast a lot. I love the tone that you set. It's not wooden. It's not structured. I mean, I really feel when I'm listening to your pod that you're sitting there talking to me right then, telling me, hey, let me tell you a story. Check this out. And it's very engaging. I really enjoy your pod.
That's where the whole idea came from is that I used to always, I'd be hanging out with people that I work with, and, I've got a plethora of experience. So we'd be sitting around and I'd look at everybody, supervisors, everybody sitting around the desk, and I'd be like, hey, let me tell you a story. I was that guy, and they were like, man, that's what your podcast should be. Because I was testing the waters with podcasting up until a year ago, and they were like, that's what you should do. You should just tell stories the way you tell stories.
Yeah,
and that's what I try to keep true to.
Oh, and it's very effective. I mean, you are a great storyteller, I have to tell you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. It comes from listening to a lot of storytellers and having a history in stage acting, and just, being enthusiastic about the stories that I tell.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, kind of reminds me a little bit how I got into podcasting myself. I mean, I love to talk film. Sometimes I bore the crap out of people. And so, I mean, it came to one point where my son-in-law said, do a podcast. I mean, because we would sit there for, a couple of hours just talking about film. And he said, yeah, you got to do a podcast. And at first, my thing is, yeah, you just want me to shut up because I'm boring you or something. But he's, no. And I mean, I shook it off right away. I didn't want to, it wasn't my thing. I mean, I have a background in film production and so forth, but podcasting, no. And I told my wife, and she was like, you know what? You're going to do it. And there was no turning back from there. Love podcasting. Podcasting is just it's a great medium for storytelling, for conveyance of information, for sharing, most of all.
Yeah. I got into podcasts late. I never really picked up on the fad of podcasting, but now not only am I a podcaster, but I'm a huge podcast fan. I've got, there's your podcast that I listen to, which I love listening to.
Thank you.
Podcasts like your previous guest, Liz from Ouch, Was That a Ghost?
Oh, she's awesome. She's
another one of my favorites. I listen to Dungeons and Daddies, which is produced by Rocket Jump. And that is just, they're like 3 years in, and I don't know how many how many episodes in, and I'm almost all the way caught up. And that's my thing is that I'm starting so behind, and I'm finding these great podcasts and trying to catch up because they're really good. I love listening to them. Mortal Musings is another one that I like. And
that's a good one. Yeah, I recently started listening to them as well. They're wow.
Yeah. And these guys, I wouldn't have found all this if I wasn't doing podcasts. And as I'm doing the podcast, I'm meeting other podcasters, and we're, communicating, and of course going on each other's podcasts. And I'm finding all these other great entertainments that are so much better than just sitting around and watching TV for some reason. And, I can hear the same story on 3 different podcasts told by 3 different people, but because each one is told and delivered in a different way, it's entertaining.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, you recently did an episode on the Manson murders.
Yes,
And
yes.
and I'd heard like at least 3 other podcasts cover the same, but everyone covers it differently. There's a different angle and a different way of conveying the events that transpired during that event, and it's fascinating because I think it also shows, it's a point of view how everybody tells a story differently,
Uh,
and
that's absolutely true.
yeah, and you get a different point of view, a different perspective, a different tone. I mean, believe it or not, you can even get a satirical, comedic tone out of somebody telling the Manson case. Believe it or not, I mean, it just depends on the storyteller, and that's what I love about podcasts. I as well, I'm just hooked. I got like maybe 20 different feeds of podcasts, including your own and lists and so forth that I'm listening to every day, every day. I love it. It's great stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful to listen to. And a lot of them, like with yours, when you and Carlos are sitting there and you're having a conversation and listening to you guys, it's kind of like you're part of the conversation, and you
Right,
get to know, you listen, beginning the podcast. Okay, what's the watch report? What did they watch
right,
this week? Ah, he's getting into Peaky Blinders. Yeah, I saw that.
right.
Yeah. Oh, he watched this one. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, and
You
that's
know,
where I wanted to hone in for my end, for example, was to just kind of, hey, we're having a conversation, hang out with us, listen to say, what we're talking about.
yeah, and it's good, and that's the beauty of podcasting, I think.
Absolutely. So, what do you say we jump into this episode?
Absolutely.
Sounds fantastic. So, before we continue, little reminder to everyone: we're not professional film critics here. We don't pretend to be. We're far from. We just love films, and we love talking about films on this show. Also, be advised that this episode may have some spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, you've been warned. So, Jonathan, based on the film that we're discussing, which is Code of Silence with Chuck Norris, we're going to do a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 roundhouse kicks.
Okay, that sounds good. That's a good way to rate this out. 1 to 10
A-
roundhouse kicks.
Absolutely. And who better than, roundhouse kick than Chuck Norris, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. So now the film we're talking about is Chuck Norris being, well, Chuck Norris in this crime action thriller from 1985.
Eddie Cusack is a good cop. Having a bad day.
My brothers, I promise you blood for blood.
With a murder to solve.
I want this guy Cusack. I want to know what he is, what he's doing, where he lives. I want it.
Bob, this is 1462. I need backup.
Hey, you don't want to be in here.
I want your opinion, I'll beat it out of you.
A Chicago cop is caught in the middle of a gang war while his own comrades shun him because he wants to take down an irresponsible cop. The film we're talking about is Code of Silence from 1985, directed by Andrew Davis, who brought us some really good actioners of the time: Above the Law, Under Siege, The Fugitive, and Collateral Damage. The film stars Chuck Norris, Henry Silva, and Dennis Farina. Now, it's been a while since I've seen this, and you stated you haven't not seen this yet, correct?
Yeah, this was I've seen some Chuck Norris movies. I've seen my share. I grew up in the 80s, but I had not seen or heard of this one. I thought I had when you mentioned it to me, and then I looked and I'm like, I've never seen this before. And I went into it expecting something, your standard Chuck Norris flick, and that wasn't what I got.
Right, definitely not. And
No.
you can see that from the tone of Davis's other films like Above the Law, Under Siege, and The Fugitive, and so forth. Which, interestingly enough, Code of Silence was Andrew Davis's first action film as a director. So he cut his teeth on this, and I think he did a great job. I mean, it's really like you said, it's your typical Chuck Norris movies, they're cheesy. There's no two ways around that, but they're fun.
So this one, it really did have its cheesy moments, but I
Hmm.
actually thought this is the least cheesy I've seen Chuck Norris outside of Walker, Texas Ranger.
Right, right. I think because they just try to play it as straight as possible. There was a couple of one-liners here and there that he delivered.
Oh yeah, they were great too.
They were awesome.
There was I don't have my notes on me. I left my notes on my other desk, but there was one when he delivered it. I just had to write it down because he walks past some guy and just says it.
I think I know what
And
scene you're talking about. Yes.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my god, that was just the delivery was perfect. And then when he comes out from in the pool hall, someone brought me
Oh,
my notes. Great, let me see if I can find it because I wrote it.
oh, fantastic.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
It was beautiful. I thought I wrote it down. I know I wrote down that he had such great one-liners. But and when he's walking out of the pool hall
Right.
and he's walking out of the office from the pool hall. He's just beat the crap out of I can't remember the guy's name, but he's beat the crap out of the guy and he's walking out and they're all sitting there and they're surrounding him. He pulls the gun on and he goes, "Okay, who wants the first one?
Right.
How about you?" And he's just beautifully delivered by Chuck. Beautifully.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think, and let's be honest, he's not a great actor, but he has a certain level of charisma, certain, I don't know, something about him that he can deliver a bad line and you'll love it.
yeah. That's so, you can't put Chuck in anything, but you can put Chuck in everything if you use him right, because he is not the best actor, but he is good at delivery and
Right.
he's good at these types of films. And he got typecast a lot in the 80s. So he got forced into a lot of the same movie. It was basically the same movie, just
Right.
different names of characters. Things that happened to Stallone and Schwarzenegger and Van Damme and even Seagal, they got typecast because of how their acting was, and it's very hard to break out of that.
Right.
Stallone and Schwarzenegger were the two success stories who were able to break from that and to start doing other types of movies, and go elsewhere with it. But if you look at like Seagal, he's been lost to time because he just got stuck in being every movie he was Steven Seagal, and every movie Chuck Norris is in, he's Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris. Now, Chuck Norris did try to break free and try something a little different. There was a film called Firewalker,
Yes.
and that was with Lou Gossett Jr., another just a great actor. And it had been literally decades since I had seen it. I remember watching it when I was a kid, and I loved it. I saw it again. It must have been maybe last year, and oh my god, I couldn't finish it. It was that bad. I mean, and that was because of the script and the scenarios and so forth. They tried to be a lighthearted action comedy, and it just didn't work. I believe the director was Sidney J. Fury who did that, and he had done some actioners before. But yeah, that one fell flat. So he couldn't break out. And it's unfortunate.
But he still had, being typecast, he had more success as this typecast actor. I mean, he's Chuck Norris.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody knows the name of Chuck Norris. Walker, Texas Ranger is probably one of the most successful TV shows that was around in its day. Lasted for, I don't know what, 12, 15 years.
Something like that, yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
it went into syndication, and it was always, I mean, you could still see Walker, Texas Ranger. Everybody talks about Walker, Texas Ranger. They remade Walker, Texas Ranger, and more people were still watching the original Walker, Texas Ranger than the remake.
Right, because what made Walker, Texas Ranger? Was it the story, the act? No, it was Chuck.
Yeah, it was Chuck Norris just being Chuck. It was Chuck Norris as a Texas Ranger. That's what it was. And it was believable because everybody believes, yep, that's what would happen if Chuck Norris was made a Texas Ranger. That is exactly what would happen.
Right. Now, have you seen Lone Wolf McQuade?
Oh God, not in decades. It's been so long. It was one my dad used to like, and I watched it with him when I was young.
That is a keeper right there. I mean, they emulate the whole Sergio Leone spaghetti western feel. And the sweaty cowboys and the tight close-ups and the showdowns and the dramatic music. It was fantastic. I think David Carradine was in that, and wow, it's top notch. That's one of my all-time favorite Chuck Norris films.
If he'd have been in the age of westerns, I think Chuck Norris would have been 10 times as big as he actually is. I think he'd have been on the level with John Wayne and Eastwood as far as Westerns are concerned had he been around in that time, because he fits just his character fits the Western feel so perfectly.
Wow, I've never really thought of it, but now that you mention it, yeah, he would have been an iconic Western cowboy star
Yeah.
in a different era.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's command presence, and I think that's what he always had.
Yeah, he has always had that ability to command presence and draw you in when he's in the scene.
Right. And
You're paying attention to what Chuck's doing when he's in the scene. Doesn't matter who else is in the scene. You recognize somebody else in the scene, sure, but Chuck's in the scene. It's Chuck's scene.
It's his, exactly.
Yeah.
And he had a decent cast along with him in this. I mean, he had Dennis Farina, who was his loyal partner, who actually, by the way, was an actual cop in Chicago while making this film.
See, I didn't know. I've seen him. He plays a cop so often. I didn't know he was an actual cop before.
Yeah, I mean, it's and you look, you say, wow, he really knows how to play a cop. Well, because he was. In fact, there's a scene in there where there's a local Chicago bar where all the cops hang out after their shifts, and
Yes.
a couple of idiots go in there to rob the place, and of course, all the cops drop down on them. And it's kind of a comedic sequence, a little levity in the tone of the film. That scenario was lifted from an actual event that Dennis Farina, was involved in.
Now, see, I didn't know he was actually involved in it, but I knew it was a real event. But the reason I knew it was a real event was because of, I think it's RoboCop 2 or 3, where they did the same scene in RoboCop 2 or 3. And I heard that it came from another movie, too. I didn't know it was Code of Silence.
Mhm.
But they did the same thing. And it's like, no, this was an actual true event that had happened. And, Farina's actually in the RoboCop movies, too.
Oh, he is. Well, you know what?
He plays a cop.
He may have whispered in the director's ear and said, "Hey, check this out." So who knows?
But
that
it
scene,
is the line from that scene that I love the most is when Chuck shows up and he says, "Who are these two guys?" And they go, "They tried to rob the place, and we called the station 45 minutes ago, and they thought it was a joke."
that had me chuckling out. That was hilarious. That was really, really funny. But yeah, that scene has been used in quite a few films, aside, RoboCop, and I know I've seen it at least 2 or 3 other films. But it's always funny. It really is.
It is, and you're right. It added this. This film has such a serious thing, and what it does, if I can get a little wax poetic on it, the title, Code of Silence.
Right.
You think it's just applying to one thing, but it's really applying to everything in the film. There's the Code of Silence amongst the cops about the bad cop. You don't talk against a cop. You don't stand against a cop. You don't do that. No. There's the Code of Silence amongst the Italian mob. There's the Code of Silence amongst the Colombian mob. They've all got this code of silence that they don't talk. They keep it all quiet. They don't rat each other out. And it's kind of the bane of everyone's existence in the end of this movie.
Right. Yeah, it does that. The theme of the title itself. Yeah, it does kind of blanket most of the aspects of this film, or the situations and scenarios.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, to me, it is the best of all Chuck Norris films, and I love a lot of his stuff, even the cheesy Delta Force, which is so militarily inaccurate. It's hilarious, but it's a fun movie.
That was the thing that's kind of what I was expecting from this, was a fun Chuck Norris style movie. The Delta Force style. I wasn't expecting it to be gritty. I wasn't expecting the realism that it took. I definitely wasn't expecting the emotional situation with the bad guys, with the bad guy killing and the daughter being taken and all of that. I wasn't expecting all that character connection that you got in there.
Right.
The melodrama with the dealing with the bad cop who's what's his name, Craigie, who's trying to cover up the fact that he shot this kid in the middle of a hallway. He's planted a gun on the kid. The moral dilemma that Nicky's having in dealing with it, because he's supposed to cover for his partner, but his partner did something that he knows is wrong, and Chuck standing up to everybody and just going, look, he's a bad cop. I know he's a bad cop, and I'm not going to be afraid to say it. I'm not going to. Chuck literally breaking the rules and then being shunned for it by the entire team, and anybody that's loyal to him, they kept away.
Right, right. Now there was one aspect that I did find cheesy, but I mean, again, for the overall tone of the film, I enjoyed it. I bought into it, but if you think about it, that whole robot tank sequence.
Okay, the second that thing hit the screen, I was like, okay, this is like a year before Johnny Five and 3 years before RoboCop. They had this thing coming out, this robotic drone. But when that thing punches through in the final fight and does its thing, I was just like, oh, I wish I'd had one of these back in the day. Oh, that's awesome. That is just awesome to watch. It was and that was the kind of the Chuck Norris part of this movie,
Right.
The kind of out there, explosive and force and shooting, and that was where that came in. But that drone just it was, and when you look at it and you see it, if you know anything about like four-wheelers and all-terrain vehicles, it's like, oh my God, they just stuck something on top of a six-wheel gator, and
Right.
it looks so stupid.
Right.
But when it finally goes on the attack, it is just awesome. And
it's I had kind of the same reaction. I see it coming in. I'm like, oh, here we go. I mean, I almost felt like the moment when Rocky in the Rocky film, Rocky 3, I think it was, where he gives Paulie a robot. And I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of going to be the same thing. But no, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was gimmicky, but it was fun. And again, I think being wrapped around by a good, decent script, a solid director who knows character, who knows action, drama. I think that's what made it just made it all work for me. So now some of the behind the scenes stuff, like we discussed earlier, the scene with the two hoods, they walk into the tavern and they try to rip them off. That was based on an actual situation. Now, one thing that's interesting, in 1979, the script was actually written in 79, and it was offered to Warner Brothers so that it could be made into a Dirty Harry film. So
this was supposed to be a Dirty Harry?
Yeah, it was supposed to be the fourth in the series.
It fits. It really does fit.
I think so. I think it would have been just as good with Eastwood. I mean, without the kung fu stuff or the martial arts. But I think it would have worked. Definitely.
Well, the thing is that, on a Chuck Norris movie, you expect to see a lot of kung fu and martial arts. But other than the one fight scene, he really doesn't do that much of his kung fu martial arts stuff. He does a lot of shooting and a couple of punches.
Yeah,
but,
and that's one thing.
This movie is more of him doing like cop stuff, real cop stuff. It was,
and
the
acting.
following, the acting. It was. So, like I said, I could see this could really have been a Dirty Harry, but I'm glad that Chuck did it because I think he delivered a classic performance.
Oh, absolutely. And in my opinion, the best film of his career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it was going to be called Dirty Harry 4 Code of Silence. But of course, Eastwood read the script. He was very picky and turned it down. Thank goodness, because we ended up getting a really great Chuck Norris film.
Yeah, it was a really great Chuck Norris film. And I'm not going to knock that Eastwood couldn't have done a better performance on it. I'm not going to say he couldn't have. But having seen the film and what I've seen of it, I think I prefer Chuck's version than
absolutely.
An idea of Eastwood's version. I would not want to see this any other way than the way Chuck delivered the character. He was perfect as Eddie Cusack.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was actually the film when it came out. It was in May of '85. That first weekend, it hit number 1, and it turned out to be one of his highest grossing films of his career.
That doesn't surprise me because it's a great film. It really is, and it's amazing that it's lost to time. But so many films that are really good do get lost. And you don't hear about them for forever. And it's kind of sad because this was a really good movie. I could see wanting to go back to the theater and watch this again with my friends and be like, "Oh, you got to come see this movie. Come on, man." Because it's what I did in the 90s. If we saw a good movie, we'd go back to the theater and watch it again.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did. And then of course you had because back then films would last a year and a half, being theatrical, theatrical releases.
Yeah.
Then they would go to cable from then on. You watch them on HBO and so forth. So a lot of these films, they would stay in the social consciousness, in this collective consciousness in film for a long time. But now we are inundated with Netflix, with Hulu, with HBO Max, and so forth. And stuff comes and it goes because there's something new right away.
Yeah, and that is the drawback is that the theaters unfortunately suffering from the streaming area and also this massive push by studios to just put out as much content as possible. And so people don't go to the theater as much anymore. The allure is kind of lost, and I really wish it would come back because that's one of my favorite things to do was to go to the theater and see movies. I remember seeing Jurassic Park on the big screen for the first time.
Wow.
Ghostbusters 2 I saw on the big screen for the first time. Return of the Jedi I saw on the big screen for the first time. I may have been at Star Wars. No, not Star Wars. Empire Strikes Back. But I was just too young to remember.
Right. And, and that's the thing. I mean, I talk to my kids, they're in like they're like 20, 21, and I'll tell them these stories and I say, yeah, I saw, Close Encounters on the big screen. And they sit there and go, man, I'm jealous. I'm telling them it was just an amazing experience. But I think all of this, I mean, I've studied film history, the industry, for many, many, many years. And this is the period in time where Hollywood has to redefine itself and reinvent itself. And what we're going to get another era of great films, of the movie going experience. But right now, I mean, look what happened in the 20s when Warner Brothers introduced sound, and there was this shift in film. Or when the television was introduced in the late 40s, early 50s, how the theater going experience started to deplete because everybody was like, I can watch it on TV. What did Hollywood do every time? They reinvented themselves. They try to top themselves and reinvent things and so forth and give us a different movie going experience. And I think that's it has to happen because, I mean, as much as I loved the whole Marvel movie experience early on, I think I'm done with it. So is a lot of people are as well.
Well, I think the problem with the Marvel movie experiences is that Marvel is a victim of its own success.
Right. Absolutely.
They set out to tell a story and they told an epic story. But the problem is that they, for one, killed off their main characters at the end of or killed off some of their main characters at the end of their epic story. And then they didn't really have anything set up for the next epic story coming from that first epic story. And then it's basically what we're seeing now is we're seeing MCU 2, the sequel. And if you've ever watched anything that has a series, it's very hard to get the second one to be as good as the first one. There are some exceptions to the rules. Batman Returns, Empire Strikes Back, Dead Man's Chest, Godfather 2, Godfather Part 2. Just make sure we get the Part 2 in there.
Absolutely.
There are some exceptions, but in the most part, the sequel usually doesn't live up to the original. And so what we're seeing is MCU, the sequel, they're trying to rehash what they did before, and it's not working because they didn't have everything planned out. They were doing something and started building on it and built this great story, which is what happens when you write a great story. And they didn't take the time to start building something and then write a great story. So I'm figuring by the time Phase 6 is over and they're like, okay, well, this is the end of this great story. Now we're going to do something different. We're going to get a decent version of the MCU because it's going to get through this sequel time.
Right. And I think I think Disney banked a little too hard. And you know what? Our fan base, they're going to stick with us. They're going to, no matter what we throw out there. And the bulk of the fans are like, no, screw you, we're done with it. We're seeing rehashes. And another mistake that Disney made, I believe, was the delayed and continued delay of the introduction of the X-Men into the MCU. Because I mean, that's what everybody had a hard on for from day one when Disney bought out 20th Century Fox. Was we're finally going to get to see the X-Men in the MCU.
I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah,
Disney has control of the two biggest Marvel properties at once when they bought out 20th Century Fox. They got
Right.
Fantastic Four and they got X-Men. These are not minor league players in the comic book world. Fantastic Four is the first family of Marvel.
Right.
Okay. They are technically bigger than Spider-Man. Spider-Man has been a member of the Fantastic Four. And Spider-Man's also been an X-Man before.
Right.
And the X-Men has got so many great characters. And there are so many ways that that the MCU could have tapped into that by now, even just bringing the characters into the show, just introducing them in some of their shows. They've got these shows, they could just throw in a freaking character, have Scott Summers walk across the stage. Oh my God, the amount of uproar just for 5 seconds of Scott Summers to appear.
Yeah. Well, I just think that Disney took their audience for granted. That's just what it comes down to, and greed.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So now let's get into the box office of this of Court of Silence. The box office at the time, with the budget actually, it cost about $7 million, and which is about $20 million in today's money, which is an average size actioner. So, and the box office was about $20 million, which is about $57 million today. So it made back its money plus some, which for a film on that level with Chuck Norris, it did very, very well.
That really doesn't surprise me. Honestly, the small amount of the budget surprises me, considering how some of those action scenes, the car wreck with when he's chasing Tony Luca close to the end, that explosion was kind of over the top there. And then there was the entire warehouse drone robot explosive scene.
Right.
That had to cost at least back then $5 million on its own.
That was an extensive sequence. It really was. Which, by the way, now that you mention it, and you mentioned earlier, RoboCop, that scene was very reminiscent of RoboCop when he walks into a giant warehouse like that, and he has a big shootout.
Yeah, it definitely was, and there have been lots of other movies that have done that. Bad Boys, Blue Streak, Lethal Weapon.
Oh, Blue Streak! My God, that's one I haven't heard of in a long time.
It's a great movie.
Really, really good film. So let's go to the reviews and scores on this bad boy. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. He called this it's a slick, generic film with good performance and a lot of genuine human interest. He gave this film 3.5 stars, which is rare for Roger Ebert to have given. You remember Roger Ebert?
Yeah, I remember Roger Ebert, and honestly, that doesn't surprise me because this had that, like I said, it was abnormal for a Chuck Norris film to have kind of emotional drama in it. Just from whether it was Chuck Norris in dealing with the victim, or Chuck Norris in dealing with his fellow police officers, or Chuck Norris in dealing with the bad guy. There was literally an emotional drama to it. Chuck Norris didn't come off as the Superman Chuck Norris that you're used to seeing. There's the scene where he actually gets beat up, and you're like, right. I was like, Chuck Norris got beat up?
Right. that can't be right. Not Chuck. But
this is a Chuck Norris film. Nobody beats up Chuck Norris.
Right.
That is the greatest acting I've ever seen. Chuck Norris took a beating.
Right. But you do know once that sequence is done and he gets his ass kicked, okay, they're dead. Because he's not.
Oh, totally.
Right. So IMDb, it's sitting at a 6.0. Metacritic, 64, which is pretty good. Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score is 68%, which is not bad at all for Rotten Tomatoes. No. The audio score sitting at 51%, and Letterboxd 3.0 out of 5. So some pretty generous, not too bad ratings on this.
They're well earned.
Absolutely.
It's not the greatest film, but it definitely is a good film.
Right. Absolutely. 100% agreed. And I remember the first time I saw this, I actually did see it in the movie theater. And like yourself, I expected, missing in action and Delta Force and stuff like that. And I remember coming out going, whoa, this was an actual film, not, a popcorn. And again, not disparaging and talking shit about his other films, but this is a real film.
Oh, it's Chuck Norris does what Chuck Norris does, and he's good at what he does. Dial back to X-Men for a minute. He's like Wolverine. He's the best he is at what he does.
Mhm.
And so you're expecting Chuck Norris to come out and to do that Chuck Norris film. That's what I was expecting. So I was expecting the whole Delta Force vibe, just as cops, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what it's going to be. And this is a real cop film, and there's real issues that are discussed. And issues that we're still dealing with today.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
It's a really deep take on it. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you say we give our ratings on this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Since you're the guest, sir, you go ahead.
So honestly, I didn't think it was going to get that many because I was expecting the Chuck Norris film. But after watching this, I'm going to give this 7.5 roundhouse kicks.
That is right on the money. I like that. Okay.
I'm putting it right at 7.5. I feel like right halfway through the last one, Chuck stopped and decided that we had enough.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay. Well, mine on this is, it's an unexpected surprise for a Chuck Norris film. And I think the peak, and unfortunately, the only film that he did on this caliber, decent story, inner conflict, outer conflict for the character dynamics were really well done. I give this a 7.5 out of 10 as well. 7.5 out of 10 roundhouse kicks.
Yeah. You don't typically go to see a Chuck Norris film expecting a 10 roundhouse kick film. You go expecting, a 5 or a 6, but what you're really going is for the Chuck Norris part of it. You're going for the action and the hardcore, one-liners and everything. And this one actually delivered a really honest to goodness film that had heart, had everything that a good film needed. So yeah, the 7.5 definitely works. It definitely earned it.
Well, we're on the same page. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So further watching, for those of you who did watch it and enjoy these type of films, I recommend from 1988, Above the Law, with Steven Seagal, which I believe that was his first outing as an action star.
It's a very good film too.
It is. And it does have those dynamics as well of character and story, which are really well structured. Lone Wolf McQuade, also with Chuck Norris, an amazing homage to the Sergio Leone spaghetti Western, which is...
And like I said earlier, Chuck could have been, a great Western star.
Right. And in this film, the Lone Wolf McQuade really brings that out. You go, wow, it's indisputable. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Another film that I recommend from 1982, Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte in 48 Hours.
Lovely film.
Great film. Really awesome dynamic. And
Eddie kills in it.
Oh, man. He was at his best, I think, in that because he was just fresh out of SNL. And he was raw. He was hungry. He wanted to prove himself. And it's an amazing film. So those of you who have not seen 48 Hours, you got to watch it.
Yeah, 48 Hours is definitely one you have to see. It's just one of those films.
Oh, absolutely. And, if you consider yourself an 80s, 90s action aficionado, that's a must watch. Another one, I don't know if you've heard of this one, or this one has definitely been forgotten. It's Sylvester Stallone and Billy D. Williams from 1981, movie called Nighthawks.
I've heard of that one, but I don't know if I've ever seen it.
Great film. Rutger Hauer, who was also in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
He's the villain in this.
Oh, he plays such a good villain.
Oh, he is so perfect. He's like some sort of foreign terrorist in New York, and they're after him, and it is a thrill of a film. Didn't do well because people expect, when it came out, Stallone was fresh off of the whole Rocky thing, and so they wanted to see him as Rocky. and it didn't do well. But it was amazing, an excellent, excellent film. And then there's another film that I highly recommend. It's a film with Jamie Lee Curtis from 1989, a little film called Blue Steel.
That is another good one, and I
Yes.
think that one actually it's lost to time, but actually didn't that one do well as good as well?
Oh, absolutely. It did very, very well. And just disappeared. I remember seeing it on cable and renting it on DVD a few times. Just a great film. So, the 80s and the 90s, I think, was the peak era for these type of films. I mean, we get a few of them here and there now that really rise above and beyond, like the John Wick series I love. Um, and what's the other one? Another action series that just recently came out, or trying to remember. I mean, that's how bad it is. We don't get them like we used to.
No, the action films aren't. They don't come like they used to anymore. And when they do come, they're not the same as they were. They've kind of given up on the whole. Hey, we're gonna, show just lots of explosions and gun shooting and killing.
Well, I think it's also attributed to the mindset of a lot of folks nowadays. It's toxic masculinity and violence and so forth, and what a man is supposed to be, what isn't, and so forth. So a lot of these films are kind of shunned and or ridiculed. It's rare that one does kind of like break through and catch everybody's attention.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, the whole toxic masculinity thing has kind of killed the '80s action film
Yeah,
because it causes toxic masculinity.
right.
Unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, but I mean, I have to say I consider myself blessed and lucky that I was able to experience that era in film, firsthand, and just really great stuff. And that's why I decided to do this miniseries, this bonus episodes, kind of bring front and center. Hey, these are films you may not heard of. Got to check them out. We can't forget these films.
Yeah, because they're a part of Americana, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sir, what do you say we start winding this down?
Yeah, I guess we've covered everything.
I think so. Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed working with you on this. And everybody, please check out The Carolina Storyteller. It's on Spotify and other platforms. Where else can we catch it?
oh, good. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're on Podchaser. We're on Deezer, iHeartRadio. I think just about anywhere you can listen to a podcast. I'm even on YouTube. I've got videos that go up on YouTube every week. So you can catch new episodes every Saturday at midnight, Friday evening, just a little bit before on YouTube. And you can find us at thecarolinastoryteller.com.
Awesome. Everybody, check them out. Awesome series. Awesome podcast. So we hope you really enjoyed our episode. And really want to thank you again, Jonathan, for joining us. And, check this podcast.
It was super fun.
Awesome. So please help to support the pod by giving us a 5-star rating. Leave us a good review. Or another way you can support us is simply to subscribe and or follow us on Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Deezer, Audible, Boomplay, or wherever you get your podcast fix. Also, don't forget, swing by our Facebook group and leave us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. Check us out on TikTok and also our YouTube channel. All these links, they're in the notes below. Check them out. You can also contact us directly via email to thefilmjoepod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. So stay tuned as we return in a couple of weeks or a few weeks for season 3. I'm Joe.
I'm Jonathan.
And this is the Film Joe podcast, where film talk happens.